to be using my friend ChatGPT to help me learn AWS, and this should be fun.
Absolutely, let's make it fun. I'm happy to help you and your friend dive into AWS. We can break it down into bite-sized pieces and keep things engaging. Just let me know where you want to start or if there's a particular AWS topic that's on your mind.
So we're going to be learning about the cloud practitioner segment of the AWS suite.
Great choice. The cloud practitioner segment is a perfect starting point. It's like the foundation layer that helps you get a big picture understanding of AWS. So we can totally start there, and I'll make it as fun and easy to digest as possible. Just let me know how you and your friend want to kick things off.
All right, perfect. So I am looking through here and I'm seeing that there's 3 cloud computing models. There's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and SaaS, which would be software as a service. What's the difference between the 3?
Absolutely, that's a really good question and a key thing to understand. So in a nutshell, infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, is kind of like renting the raw building blocks of computing. You get virtual machines, storage, networks, and you control the operating system and everything on top of it. Then platform as a service, or PaaS, is more like getting a ready-made development environment, so you get all the tools and infrastructure you need to build and deploy applications without worrying about managing the underlying servers. And finally, software as a service, or SaaS, is basically fully finished software that you just use over the internet, like your email or a CRM, and you don't worry about any infrastructure or platform stuff at all. So those are the main differences. We can definitely dig into any of them more deeply if you want.
All right, so I'm just going to read out some of what this book I have. This book is the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner Exam Guide. So I'm just going to read a few segments out. Infrastructure as a service, which is IaaS, offers the greatest flexibility in giving the customer access and the ability to configure the underlying network, storage, and compute services that power the line of business. So first, my question is, what is the line of business? Just give me a real quick answer as if I'm a kindergartner.
Absolutely, let's keep it super simple. So a line of business is basically just the kind of work a company does. For example, if a company sells toys, then their line of business is selling toys. If they go on a bakery, their line of business is baking and selling bread. It's just a fancy way of saying what the business does to make money.
All right. And infrastructure as a service, how would that relate to your standard business? For example, online retailer. What would infrastructure as a service provide an online retailer?
Sure thing. So for an online retailer, infrastructure as a service is kind of like giving them a flexible toolkit of all the computing resources they need, but without having to own any physical hardware themselves. So if they need more servers during a big cycle, they can just scale up quickly, and if things are quieter, they can scale down. Basically, it gives them the freedom to manage all the computing power, storage, and networking they need through the cloud, so they can focus on selling stuff and not on maintaining physical servers.
And there's 6 advantages of cloud computing. Which ones would infrastructure as a service check off?
Yeah, absolutely. So infrastructure as a service definitely ticks off a bunch of those classic cloud advantages. For example, it gives you scalability, so you can easily scale your resources up or down. It gives you cost efficiency because you pay for what you use instead of having to buy a whole bunch of hardware up front. And it also gives you flexibility because you can experiment and try out different configurations without locking yourself into one setup. So those are some of the big ones. It's all about making things easier and more flexible for businesses.
And then platform as a service, I'm going to read just a little bit from this book as well. Platform as a service is another cloud computing model designed to remove the burden of configuring and managing underlying infrastructure resources such as compute, storage, and network services. Platform as a service is designed to allow your organization to focus on developing your application code and offers you a platform to deploy and manage your application releases, updates, and upgrades. So the way I interpret this is the platform as a service allows a company to maybe test certain things out, have their firewall, their storage, their compute services, all in an environment that they have access to, but it's just another means, just like infrastructure as a service. But if anything, it's
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track. So, platform as a service is really all about giving you a ready made environment to play with instead of you having to build out and manage all those underlying layers yourself, like the compute and storage and so on. The PaaS provider takes care of all of that. So, you just jump straight into coding and deploying your applications. And yeah, you can absolutely test things out there, do your updates, manage your releases, and you don't have to worry about the nitty gritty of the infrastructure. So it's like the playground for your code, where a lot of the heavy lifting is done for you.
so infrastructure as a service is the foundational piece, and then the platform as a service would be the piece that stacks on top of the infrastructure. Because the infrastructure is it's not OpEx. It would be whichever expense you use whenever you're using something. What's the other? It's not OpEx. It's
Yeah, you got it. So in this scenario, infrastructure is definitely your foundational layer, and then platform builds on top of that to make it easier to just focus on your applications. And in terms of the cost terminology, you're thinking of CapEx, capital expenditure, versus OpEx, which is operational expenditure. So when you're using IaaS or PaaS, you're basically moving more of your costs into the OpEx category because you're paying as you go rather than buying a bunch of hardware upfront as CapEx. So that's the word you were looking for.
And then we've already talked about IaaS, we've talked about PaaS, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service. And what was the third one again?
Yeah, the third one is software as a service, or SaaS. So that's the one where you're basically using fully complete software applications over the internet. Think of things like Gmail or Salesforce. You just log in and use the software, and you don't have to worry about the infrastructure or the platform behind it. Everything is managed for you, and you just get the final product as a service. So those are the big three: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS.
Now, the difference between platform as a service and software as a service, I'm guessing platform as a service allows you to run whatever software you deploy that um, on that server.
Yeah, you're spot on. So the big difference is really about control and customization. With platform as a service, you get this environment where you can run your own applications, your own code. You basically deploy whatever software you want onto that platform that they give you. But with software as a service, you're just using a finished application that someone else has already built and is hosting for you. So you don't have to deploy anything yourself, you just log in and use it. So yeah, PaaS gives you that freedom to run your own stuff, while SaaS is like a ready-made service that you just hop onto and go.
So my takeaway from this is if I'm using Microsoft Office and I'm using it on a cloud-based system where I can log in on any computer or any device and open up my same files in Microsoft Word, that would be software as a service because I'm accessing that software on a cloud platform.
Exactly, you've got it spot on. If you're using something like Microsoft Office 365 online, where you can just log in from any place and open up your Word documents or Excel spreadsheets right there in the browser, that's a perfect example of software as a service. You're just tapping into that software through the cloud, and everything is managed and updated for you. So that's exactly the idea of SaaS.
But then when it comes to platform as a service, if I want to upload my own software onto this platform, how do I do that? And then when I do that, the size of my platform or the size of the program or application I put on this platform will determine the cost as well, and how frequently I access it will also determine the cost as well too, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. So with platform as a service, you'd basically have a platform like AWS Elastic Beanstalk or Google App Engine, and you'd upload your own application code onto that platform. So you don't have to worry about the underlying servers, but you just package up your app and deploy it. And you're right, the cost will depend on how much you're using. So if your application is large, or if it's running a lot and you're getting a lot of traffic, then you'll pay more. But if you're using it less, you'll pay less. So it's all about how much you use and the resources your app needs.
So I sometimes work in music studios with producers and engineers as just a consultant and a third ear. Now, a lot of times you have software that is on the cloud that they use. Before, everything was in the box, which meant you're mixing everything on the computer and not on a hardware console. But it went from hardware consoles to purchasing a VST, which is a virtual software. VST? Virtual software. What is a VST actually?
Yeah, no worries at all. A VST actually stands for Virtual Studio Technology. It's basically the type of software plugin that you use inside your digital audio workstation, like Ableton or Logic or Pro Tools. And yeah, you're totally right that things have really shifted from those big hardware consoles to everything being done in the box on the computer. And now with cloud-based tools, a lot of those VSTs and plugins can also be accessed or managed through the cloud. So it's kind of the same idea. You're just moving from physical hardware to software on your machine, and now to potentially cloud managed or cloud accessible tools. So you're definitely seeing that same evolution there.
All right. So you caught on to what I'm saying. We went from the outboard gear and then in the box, and now you have a lot of these virtual studio technologies that are accessible via the cloud. So um, it doesn't take up any space on your computer. You just have to have access to the internet. Now, the people who upload these virtual studio technologies to the cloud, they would be the customer, and then the people who use it would be the consumer. But when you're looking at things from the eyes of AWS is the business, and the company that uploads the VST is the client.
Absolutely, you've got the picture exactly right. So from AWS's perspective, the company that's uploading and hosting those VSTs or any other kind of software on the cloud is their customer. And then the end users, the producers and engineers who are accessing it over the internet, are the consumers. So it's kind of a chain where AWS is providing that cloud platform, the VST provider is their client, and the end users are the ones ultimately using the service. And like you said, one of the big perks is that it doesn't take up space on your computer, and you just need that internet connection. So you've definitely got the flow of how it all fits together.
So in what I've just described, I connected it to something that I personally am aware of, and some of my people who are watching in this audience would be aware of too. But there's one that's common for everybody: Netflix. They upload all of these movies and shows, and if I pay for Netflix, I'm able to access behind the paywall. But if I don't pay for Netflix, I can go on the Netflix website, but I won't be able to go past the paywall and watch videos until I have my own key to access, which would mean I would give them an email, a password, and a payment plan, and now I can access the cloud and watch movies anywhere I like versus having DVDs and going to Blockbuster, and that tells you how old I am. Am I going somewhere with this?
Absolutely, you are right on the money with that analogy. So Netflix is a perfect example of software as a service that everyone can relate to. Just like you said, instead of renting DVDs from Blockbuster back in the day, you're now just logging into a service on the cloud, and as long as you've got your account and you've paid for it, you can access it from anywhere. So yeah, it's a really great parallel to what we were talking about. It's a perfect example of how cloud services work in everyday life. So you are definitely going somewhere with that, and it's a great example to share.
So that's just a general overview, but what's the mechanisms that allows this system to work? So how is it that I'm able to set up a password and a payment method and then go into the cloud to watch movies? And how is it I'm able to watch movies but I'm not able to see the back end configuration of the inner workings of Netflix? Is that a security protocol? What would that security protocol be? And give me the sequence.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a whole set of mechanisms behind the scenes that make that all work smoothly. Essentially, what you're looking at is a combination of authentication, which is like your password and login process, and authorization, which is making sure you only get access to the parts you're allowed to see. So when you create an account with Netflix, for example, you enter your email, your password, and your payment info. All that data is stored securely and is managed by identity and access management systems. And yeah, it's all protected by security protocols. Typically, that includes encryption, secure connections like HTTPS, and other security measures that keep the backend hidden from users so that you can't just poke around in the Netflix infrastructure. So in terms of the sequence, it would go something like this. First, you sign up and create your account. Then when you log in, the system authenticates you by checking your credentials. Once you're authenticated, it authorizes you to access the content that you paid for. And all the while, encryption and other security protocols are making sure that everything is kept private and secure. So that's kind of the behind-the-scenes mechanism that lets you just hit play and enjoy your movies without ever seeing the inner workings.
So working with this example that I described, what are some of the AWS terminologies that would be associated to this demonstration?
Absolutely. Let's tie it back to some AWS terms. So for something like Netflix, a few AWS services and terminologies come into play. For example, you've got Amazon EC2, which is Elastic Compute Cloud. That's the infrastructure as a service piece that can run the servers and the compute power behind the scenes. Then you've got Amazon S3, which is simple storage service, and that would be used for storing all the video files or other data that Netflix might have. It's a place to keep all those big media assets. For managing user identities and access, you might have something like AWS Cognito, which helps with user sign up, sign in, and access control. And then for the overall security and encryption, AWS has a whole bunch of security services and protocols that make sure only authorized users get in. So basically you've got EC2 for compute, S3 for storage, Cognito for user management, and a whole bunch of AWS security features all working together to create that smooth, secure, cloud-based experience, just like the Netflix example.
So give me an example that ties back to the toy company. How would EC2 and S3 tie back into the deployment of a toy company's website?
Absolutely. Let's bring it back to that toy company example. So if a toy company wanted to run their website and maybe even their online store using AWS, they could use EC2 to host the website itself. So all the computing power to run the site, handle customer traffic, and process orders could be on EC2 instances. And then they could use S3 to store things like product images, videos, or any other media that they need to serve to customers through their website. So basically, EC2 would be the engine running the site and handling all the transactions, and S3 would be like the big storage room where they keep all their images and files that they show to customers. And together, those AWS services let the toy company run their online business smoothly in the cloud.
So let's dig deeper into EC2. If EC2 is the engine, what could we compare this engine to in the real world?
into a real world analogy. If you think of EC2 as the engine, you could compare it to something like the engine of a car. So in the same way that a car engine is what powers the vehicle and makes it move, EC2 is what powers your application or your website and keeps it running. You can start it up, you can shut it down, you can scale it up if you need more power, just like you might upgrade an engine or give it more fuel. And if you don't need it running all the time, you can just turn it off and you're not using those resources. So EC2 is really that flexible engine in the cloud that you can control, just like you would control the engine of a car.
And is EC2 a pay-as-you-go pricing model?
Yes, exactly. EC2 uses a pay-as-you-go pricing model, which is one of the things that makes it really flexible. So you only pay for the compute time that you actually use. If you run an instance for a few hours, you pay for those hours. If you shut it down, you're not paying for that compute time anymore. So it's kind of like an electricity bill. You only pay for what you use. And that makes it really cost effective, especially if your needs go up and down, or if you just want to keep things flexible.
So if I have a toy website and I have a lot of people who browse on the website and they're not buying anything, I'm running EC2 instances, but I'm not getting a ROI.
Yeah, that's a real world situation that can definitely happen. If you have a lot of visitors on your toy website who are just browsing but not actually buying anything, then yeah, you're still paying.
October, I sent you a text today, so.
So if I have a toy website and I have a lot of people who browse on the website and they're not buying anything, I'm running EC2 instances, but I'm not getting a ROI.
Yeah, that's definitely a scenario that can happen. If you've got a lot of visitors just browsing and not actually making purchases, then you're still paying for the EC2 instances that are keeping the site up and handling all that traffic, but you're not seeing a return on investment from those visitors. So at that point, you might start thinking about optimizing. For example, you could adjust your EC2 scaling so that you're not running more instances than you really need, or you might look at ways to convert more of those visitors into buyers so that you do get that ROI. But yeah, that's part of the pay-as-you-go model. It's flexible, but it also means you want to make sure you're making the most out of the resources you're paying for.
Now I would hope that those EC2 instances are low cost. What cost would we be looking at for a small mom and pop business selling toys and comic books online?
So for a small mom and pop business selling toys online, the cost of running a basic EC2 instance can be pretty affordable. For example, a small instance might cost around a little over a penny per hour on a pay-as-you-go model. You can also get discounts if you commit to a year or more, and there are even free tiers if you're just starting out. So it's definitely possible to keep the cost low, especially if you're mindful about how you scale.
Now committing to a year or more could give you a discount, and that means that for the foreseeable future you don't see any major changes happening. But for other industries that need that flexibility, being locked into a model for a year or two might not be beneficial because they might have projections of rapid growth in the near future.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about what fits your business's needs. If you feel stable and you don't expect big changes, then committing to a longer term plan can definitely save you money. But if you're in an industry where you think you might have a sudden spike in growth, or you just need that flexibility, then staying on a pay-as-you-go model is probably a better choice so that you can scale up or down as needed. It really depends on how predictable you think your traffic and growth will be.
Now I want to jump back into the cloud deployment models, and I'm seeing three things I'm curious about. There are three primary models of deployment. You have a public cloud, you have a private cloud, and you have a hybrid cloud.
Absolutely, let's dive into those. So the three primary cloud deployment models each have their own unique setup. A public cloud is basically where you're using cloud services that are shared with other users. So everything runs on infrastructure owned by the cloud provider, like AWS, and you're basically renting a piece of that shared infrastructure. A private cloud, on the other hand, is when you have cloud infrastructure that's used exclusively by one organization. So it's not shared with others, and it might be hosted on premises or by a third party, but it's all dedicated to you. And then a hybrid cloud is a mix of both. So you might have some services running in a public cloud and others in a private cloud, and you can move data or workloads between them as needed. It's kind of the best of both worlds if you need flexibility. So those are the three main deployment models.
So using this small mom and pop business again, what would make them choose a public cloud versus a private cloud? And are there any security differences between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a small mom and pop business, one of the big reasons they might choose a public cloud is cost and simplicity. Public clouds like AWS are usually more budget friendly because you're sharing the infrastructure with other users and you don't have to worry about maintaining your own hardware. It's also easier to get started and scale up or down as needed. On the other hand, a private cloud might be chosen if they have very specific security or compliance needs, or if they just want to have complete control over their environment. But that comes with more complexity and often a high cost. In terms of security, both